Tecovas is the go-to for premium, handcrafted Western boots. Stop by any store location for a warm welcome, a cold drink in hand, and a truly one-of-a-kind shopping experience. Let our friendly staff help you find your new go-to boots, whether your first pair or your 50th. Finish things off with a complimentary boot brand to make them extra special. Come for the boots, stay for the good times. Tecovas, forever West.
This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcast. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. Tom, what do we got?
Yes. Well, today we're going to look at, Today we're going to look at, we're getting back to the history aspect, right? And we're going to look at the rise, and then something that we were actually alive for. We were young, we were alive for, and that is the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yep, and David Hasselhoff singing on the Berlin. I still remember, I vividly remember this happening.
Well, he takes credit for ending the Cold War.
Yeah, it was Kit parked by the Berlin Wall somewhere at the bottom there.
No, let's not get crazy now. Peter. They did have a jacket that was lighting up and everything. But
the jacket that was lit up.
They didn't tear it down when he was on it, though, did they? That was later on. But I know he sung on it
He sung on the day it was being taken down, the Berlin Wall. They put a crane up there and they brought him up, and he was singing a song. This
on
famous
top of it,
song.
And if you watch a YouTube video, I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. But I know if you watch it, he almost gets hit by a rocket a couple times. They're fireworks, like Roman candles.
Oh, you serious?
They a bottle almost hits him once too. I think people were just throwing stuff. They were so excited. I don't think they were throwing at him because he was. And to this day, the joke is how widely popular and stuff like that he is in Germany.
He was super popular in Germany. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we are talking about not just about David Hasselhoff in 1989 singing "Looking for Freedom" on the Berlin Wall, but we are talking about what he was standing on, which is the Berlin Wall,
which really has become a symbol of the Cold War.
Absolutely. People think Iron Curtain, they think the Berlin Wall, but that's not the same thing. However, it did come to symbolize that. I think that's the closest it got to the Iron Curtain being a real thing. And by the way, the Iron Curtain was first mentioned in a speech by Winston Churchill.
That's a Churchill speech, yeah.
Yep, when he was in the United States visiting Harry S. Truman. Then he said that an Iron Curtain has fallen across Europe, basically dividing the democracy and communist nations of Europe, mainly the Soviet bloc and the Western powers. But the Berlin Wall actually doesn't really go up until 15 years into the Cold War.
Well, what basically happens is, World War II comes to an end, right?
Yep, let's get it.
Go ahead. Yeah, so the Allies have these peace conferences at Yalta and one at Potsdam. And they're going to determine what's going to happen to the territories in Germany. And they decide it's going to be split into 4 Allied occupied zones. The Germans can't govern themselves yet, so we're going to split these into 4 Allied occupied zones: the American zone, a British zone, a French zone, and the Soviet zone. Right. So the eastern part went to the Soviet Union, and the western part went to the United States. All of it, yeah. And then, Berlin was totally. This is something people don't always remember. Berlin was totally in the Soviet section, but it's about 100 miles from the border of East and West. The agreement was also they were going to split the city into similar sectors.
Yep.
So what becomes East Berlin is really kind of they call it a democratic island in a sea of socialism. Ooh, right? That sort of thing. So the Soviets take the eastern half, while the Allies took the western half. And right away, you start seeing some issues, basically, with what's going on. Because Stalin wants all of Berlin.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the first time this really comes up, this 4-way occupation quickly changes more or less, because half of Germany, like you said, belongs to the Soviet Union. The other half to these 3 other nations, just like the city of Berlin does, which is located in the eastern Soviet half. But the other 3 decide that U.S., Britain, and France basically consolidate their half.
Into one zone, yeah.
Yep, to one zone. And at the end of World War II, they decide that it's actually beneficial for West Germany to exist again, for Germany to be unified and exist and have its own government, which is something that, Stalin was very much against. I mean, and Stalin was afraid of having a powerful Germany. So he's like, no, I don't think this is okay.
Well, he
So
also
while
he was afraid of an invasion from the West, so he wanted that kind of East Germany there. It's like a buffer also.
absolutely,
That's where the fighting would take place, and they'd have to smash through, the Soviet troops in East Germany before they ever got into the heart of the Soviet Union. He was still having flashbacks to Stalingrad and all the other what was going on during World War II itself, and he didn't want that happening again.
yep.
So he wants to drive them out. And in 1948, the Soviets put up a blockade around Western Berlin, basically stop all the roads, and they're basically trying to starve the Western Allies out of the city.
Yeah, they're thinking like, you know what? You already have your West Germany, so let
Keep
us
that,
have our
yeah.
East Germany, and let's kick that little island, that little portion, half of a city, out of the
Yeah.
Eastern Bloc. So, like you said, this is known as the Berlin Airlift. Essentially, what
Well,
comes
that's
out
yeah,
of
because
this.
they close down the road, so they have to find some way to get supplies in, and becomes known as the Berlin Airlift. And it lasted for more than a year. They deliver over 2.3 million tons of food, fuel, other goods to West Berlin, like chocolates, all this other stuff. I remember reading a book called like the Candy
The
Pilots. They
chocolate
were just
bomber, isn't it a
dropping,
chocolate
the
bomber? I
chocolate
think it's chocolate
bombers. Yeah,
bomber.
they're just dropping those. They're dropping candy and stuff like that. Because they didn't have that, and not that they don't have it, but it was Western chocolate is pretty different than Soviet chocolate, right? Um,
Trust me, I've had both.
yeah, exactly. I was
Um,
going to say, yeah, we'll talk about your life in the Soviet Union later on, but
all right, it was the Soviet Union, but it was it
Soviet
was the
Poland.
Soviet bloc, yes. And actually, I did visit East Germany as well as West Germany, and I did visit East Berlin and West Berlin when those were actual places in the
Oh,
80s. And there was definitely a major distinction
well, it was a major.
between
Yeah, there was a major,
East and
major.
West,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
So, as you
The
mentioned,
Soviet, yeah, I guess get back to. I'm sorry. The Soviets call off the blockade in '49, and basically Truman kind of calls Stalin's bluff because if he shoots down one of the planes, it's World War III.
yep.
So that's kind of he kind of like So let's see what happens here.
So the reason why Stalin is very much against West Berlin, as you said already, Tom, it is kind of like a thorn in his back, right? It's this little tiny island in like surrounded by a socialist essentially nation, because in 1949, officially 1949, the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany, is created by the Soviets.
That's what I
So
never got. Why do these like communist countries call themselves democratic?
I know, right? I never got that.
Because that's what
Um,
North Korea is like that too. They call themselves
Same thing.
Democratic
Yep.
Republic of North Korea. It's like,
Same
yeah,
premise.
not quite. But
Yeah,
anyway,
not really.
now that we said
Um,
that, we're going to get like flagged. Watch.
see what you did?
Yeah, it happened.
However, the German Democratic Republic, also known as GDR or East Germany, is declared on October 7th, 1949. And that's when you have Soviets are kind of backing away from East Germany, letting East Germany kind of govern itself. But this is still like a puppet state. This is a communist East Germany. And therefore, it's a communist, socialist, non-capitalist nation. And right in the center of it is half of a city that is literally beaming with capitalism. We're talking, McDonald's eventually. We're talking sky rises. We're talking American cars. We're talking
Well,
basically
you're seeing capitalism. You're seeing wealth
in
that
the
the other
middle of
side
poverty.
that the other side cannot generate. Like
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. A communist society, whatever you want to say about it, a communist society like they were back during this time, the
Yeah.
50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, during that time frame, it cannot compete with a capitalist society as far as like the goods and the types of goods. And I think that's something that a lot of people just don't understand, especially students, when you're trying to explain to them, American students, nowadays, with your iPods and your everything else and all the different types of jeans and branding, so those don't exist. Or if they do, it's minimal. There's not as
Yeah.
much choice. At the very least, you're not going to have the amount of choice. You don't have the same amount of potential that you're going to have that you have in a capitalist society. That's just how it is
Absolutely.
by definition.
Yeah.
And what's happening during this time was it was calm for a while, but he said in '58 is when the space race kind of heats up again. The Russians launched Sputnik, that starts a space race, and then a lot of these intellectuals, like the doctors, the engineers, teachers, people of that nature, are leaving. The young skilled workers are leaving in massive droves, nearly 3 million of them, since the start leaving East Berlin for West
And East
Berlin.
Berlin, yeah. And
Yeah,
we have to also mention the fact that in 49, when East Germany is officially created, the border is strengthened between East and West Germany. So it's actually impossible now at this point, from this point forward, to escape from East Germany to West Germany. It's nearly impossible because the entire national border is basically strengthened and you have military there. There's no way to get through. However, the one last place through which you can escape East Germany is within Berlin. If you simply go from East Berlin to West Berlin. And at this time, we're talking early 50s, you could still get just a regular pass from like your local magistrate or whatever, and you could go to East Berlin or West Berlin freely. Actually, it was a subway stop. You could just go. People would work in West Berlin and go back home to East Berlin, and this seemed kind of counterproductive, especially since West Berlin was getting so much wealthier. And as you're bringing this up, is this idea that all of a sudden this becomes known as the brain drain.
Yeah,
The
they start leaving.
Yeah, the officials in East Germany are starting to freak out that all of these like really bright young men are literally just like hopping on a little subway, going to West Berlin from East Berlin, and then you never hear from them again because from West Berlin they would take a flight out of Germany or East Germany into like the United States or
Yeah, they
anywhere
go to
else.
the United States, and and that's it. They're gone. And there was also one thing that kind of historians say that kind of scared the Russians and forced the Russians into this more was what are they doing? They were planning on changing the dollar, right? Like the currency that was being accepted, and they were only going to start to accept just the like the West Berlin note, basically, right?
Yep.
Not the Russian Berlin note, and that would have pretty much crippled the economy even further. And this was in like June of 1961. You start getting more and more people. I think in the first 11 days of August, you had 16,000 East Germans cross the border into West Berlin. Then August 12th, you had 2,400, and that was the largest number of effectors in one single day on August 12th, 1961. And that was it. So Khrushchev, he's a leader now, right? Khrushchev, he tells the East German government, you now have permission to stop the flow of immigrants by closing the border for good.
Yep.
And in just 2 weeks, the East German army, the police force, they had volunteer workers. They completed the beginning of what becomes a Berlin Wall, really just a bunch of barbed wire, concrete, and then the Berlin Wall divided one side of the city from the other.
I mean, they divided things like they divided properties. They went in the middle of a road.
It's like it was like one day. There it is.
Yeah,
that was it.
Literally, they said that people woke up and the next day there was just construction workers throughout the entire city continuously building this barbed wire kind of slapped together with concrete thing. It wasn't pretty at first by any means.
Yeah.
And this is designed to stop the exodus of immigrants, from East Germany. That's ultimately all this is about. And so you said it starts in you would say June 1961?
Well, that was when it had like kind of the phrase of the freaking.
That's when it decided. August.
So August of 1961 is when it starts, and then they basically there you can still cross. I guess the most famous crossing is Checkpoint Charlie, but there were other ones: Checkpoint Alpha, Checkpoint Bravo. It winds up being over 12 checkpoints across the wall during different times. And basically, at these checkpoints, there's East German soldiers. They screen diplomats, other officials before they were allowed to enter or leave.
I have a couple of pictures by Checkpoint Charlie, by the way.
Yeah, but basically, travelers from East and West Berlin were rarely ever allowed to cross the border.
Crazy.
And the construction of the wall, it didn't stop the flow of refugees from east to west, and it didn't diffuse the crisis either. President Kennedy was definitely not happy about it. He was a president, obviously, in 61, but he conceded that the wall is basically, I think a quote I saw was, a wall is a hell of a lot better than a war.
Yeah. So he was saying, like, it sucks, but if that's what we have to do.
If that's what we have to, we're not going to bomb it. We're not going to blow it up. The people are still going to be crossing. So 2 years after the Berlin Wall was elected, John F. Kennedy delivered one of his famous speeches of his presidency, and a crowd of about 120,000 people gathered outside the wall. That's basically when he says that famous speech when he says, "I am a Berliner," but he says it in German, right?
Ich bin Berliner. Yeah. And people think that he says jelly donut, but he doesn't. I think he pretty much says, "I am Berliner." But what's happening here is East German, the border is officially closed on August 13th, right? West Berlin was closed, and you have East German troops and workers basically start tearing up the streets that run alongside the border just to make them impassable.
Yeah, putting more barbed wire.
Yeah, more barbed wire, anything, just you can't.
They were fortifying it, yeah.
Exactly. And eventually this starts really kind of building itself up. to the extent that a lot of people are trying to escape, but this is where it becomes nearly impossible because if you guys ever, any of you, look up the actual structure of the wall, this is not one wall. This is a complex. It's definitely two walls.
Well, it's
Um,
like a wall, then it's almost like an open area, then it's another wall.
yeah,
So
but
a
the
lot of
open
people
area
get
is all spikes,
spikes,
ditches,
barbed wire, and there's
barbed
guard
wire,
towers. So there's
electrical
a
wire.
number of 171 people that they know of were killed trying to cross.
Yep. They called that
It really,
area in between, like after the Berlin Wall, which you, all from the West Berlin side, you just see the famous wall. Like when you guys think of images of Berlin Wall, you see the
yes, you're seeing
graffiti
the
and all
western
that.
side. Yeah,
That's
that's
Western
west. Yeah,
side.
but yeah,
Eastern side,
you're not putting the graffiti on the eastern side. That's the
no, you'd be
Soviet. So
shot.
you'll be shot. Yeah, that's what I don't think people understood that. Oh, there's a wall. No. That's the western side that they're spraying graffiti on. You try to
Because
do
yeah,
that from the other side, not happening.
yeah,
And if you really think about it, from 1961 to 1989, they said about 5,000 East Germans. All right, a good chunk of those were probably border guards. Did it, just defected and they left.
yeah.
But that's a long period of time, and only 5,000 is not that many people compared to what was happening beforehand. And a lot of them that did manage to cross, I guess we'll talk about some individuals later on. They jumped out of windows that were like adjacent to the wall. They
I saw
climbed over
that.
the barbed wire fence. Some flew in hot air balloons. A lot of
That's the
people
last guy. Actually, last fatality
crawled through
was.
sewers.
You see that the last one was March 1989. A young East German attempted to fly over the wall with a hot air balloon, and he crashed into power lines and died. This is the
Yeah.
last one,
And
1989.
a lot of other ones, they said they would just like drive through unfortified parts of the wall at high speeds and just try to like beat, before the Soviets could like catch them. Just drive really fast,
It's
really through
crazy. I mean, in
and
the
stuff
area
like
right
that.
by it, the Berlin Wall from the Soviet side, it was known as the Death Strip because it was like 160 yards wide, hundreds of watchtowers, anti-vehicle trenches, guard dog runs, floodlights, tripwire, machine guns, spikes. I mean, from the eastern side, because remember, they're trying to keep the Easterners in. The West was just like a graffiti wall. I have a picture by that wall standing with my dad, when I'm a little kid, just kind of chilling by the wall versus on the other side, you didn't get near the wall. It was the death strip before it. There's no way of getting out. And like I said, people tried in all kinds of ways to try to do this. Um, I mean, from what I saw, I did see that about 5,000, right? Escape by
Yeah,
going
and which is, I mean, I guess
someone under.
5,000, but someone under the wall, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
Well, yeah, a lot of people went through the sewers, and there were signs too on the other side, on the west side, that said, "Listen, as you're approaching this, you're leaving the American sector, so be careful.
Yeah,
Like, we can't guarantee your safety if you're going over." I didn't really see too many things of people going from the western side into the eastern side. If they were doing that, they were more going in trying to sneak people out,
wow.
more or less. But there was an 18-year-old bricklayer that was shot and wounded by the time they climbed over the wall. For 50 minutes, he begged for help, and he slowly bled to death inside of the soldiers, and also inside of the journalist overlooking the wall on the western checkpoints. And that's when a lot of this stuff started coming back to the United States. This was in '62, so it's pretty early on. And they talk about, they didn't even go to help him. They only waited after he died. Then the East German guards went to like retrieve his body. And once this gets written up in like the American press, that's it. Like people are like getting really like are realizing what's actually going on here. And people really, these people are trying to run for a new life. Like they're trying to get
Yep.
over this wall just for freedom. They're not bringing anything with them.
Yep. Just
You
to
know,
get to the west side, and from west, like I said, from the west, Berlin. That was the gateway to the rest of the world. They could come to the United States if need be. There's one story of the brothers, the Bethke brothers, I think. The eldest of the brothers, Ingo, escaped by floating on an inflatable mattress across the Elbe River in 1975. And then 8 years later, another brother, Holger, actually, this is interesting. He shot a steel cable. He fired from like a bow and arrow to a rooftop in West Berlin, and then literally like soared over the wall on the steel cable, kind of like
like
Kevin McAllister did.
like
Um,
Batman.
yeah, like literally across. Like that's kind of. I thought that was kind of interesting to try to get across. Um, but yeah, so
So
JFK
the
goes
wall's
in.
up. Yeah, so the wall's up. Yeah, JFK, he's giving his speech. And that's basically what I said. Like, it's just people try to get over the wall, and there's this wall in Berlin from 61 basically until 89,
89.
right?
Yeah, they start taking it down in 1990, to be more precise. But But yeah, I mean,
Well, I think November 9th is when 89 is when basically the Cold War begins to thaw
yeah,
because you have the spokesman for the East Berlin Communist Party announced that basically there's like a change in relation to the West. And starting on midnight that day, he said citizens of the East Germany, excuse me, were free to cross their country's borders. East and West Berliners, they flocked to the wall. They're drinking beer. They're drinking champagne. They're shouting, "Open the gate!" And at midnight, they flooded through the checkpoints. And a lot of people said they simply. I remember you can see all this on TV.
yeah, it's all
They
YouTube.
kind of knew it was coming. So you type in, you see all these news broadcasts and stuff. That the wall's still there, and that people are. And I remember even before this, you can watch all these like Brokaw, right? Tom Brokaw and all
Hmm.
those other guys are at the wall. I remember showing them to my classes and stuff over the years. And it's interesting. Some of it I do remember. Like again, I was 7. Right? You probably remember
Yeah,
it differently than me because were you still in? Were you
I
still
was there.
Soviet
Yeah,
at this
yeah, yeah.
time?
Yeah, I
Or were
was
you
there.
part of like you weren't an American yet?
No, I was not yet an American. No. The reason the Berlin Wall fell is primarily because, and I don't want to say solely because, but I would say importantly enough because of Poland, and that's because
I
of
was
the
going to say David
Solidarity
Hasselhoff.
movement, and that's well, David Hasselhoff, yeah, but Solidarity movement
Yes,
and
yes, yeah.
with the
That,
Soviet,
with the Pope, yeah, right.
yeah, exactly. No, you're right,
Yes,
but
yeah, absolutely.
essentially, what's happening? The Soviet Union countries, satellite countries, Solidarity movement in Poland, and then you have Hungary, and all these different nations are starting their kind of like they're going against communism, and they have enough, and it gets to the point that the Soviets can no longer control their satellite nations, and that's what together with which we should really do a podcast on perestroika and just
Yeah,
the fall of Soviet Union. You have Gorbachev real loosening or easing some tensions, and this idea of like, all right, well, we can't really hold on to our Soviet empire, so Poland essentially declares free elections. And once Poland declares free elections, then the Soviet government doesn't send an army into Poland to stop that like they did to Hungary back in the 50s, 60s.
that was a big thing. They couldn't meet it by force because they didn't have. I'm not
The
going to say they
force,
weren't like the global power, but what else
money.
was going on in the world? Well, yeah, they were basically bankrupt from the war in Afghanistan.
Yep.
Right? People forget that they were there first, fighting first. In the '80s. Go watch that excellent Tom Hanks movie that doesn't get enough credit. Charlie Wilson's War.
Yep.
All right, with that, and which leads to a bunch of other things, which we all know what happens with Afghanistan later on. But yeah, they're kind of bankrupt from that.
And this
They
shows
realizing
East
that
Germany, though. By the way, like East
yeah,
Germany's like,
and they can't compete with the United with the capitalism anymore. They're kind of
nope,
bankrupt from trying to keep up spending wise. Their economy just can't generate that type of capital to keep up that
yep,
spend. A lot of people give Reagan a lot of credit for it. That can be argued, I'm sure, both different
yeah,
ways. But the idea he's just going to spend them into non-existent with a
yeah.
new arms race, basically.
But what happens here is so East Germany kind of gets the same idea. Like what, like all these
Let's see what
satellite nations
happens.
are
Yeah,
falling. Yeah, let's see what happens. And this is
yeah.
I don't know if you saw this, but this is kind of interesting because the fall of the Berlin Wall kind of happened by mistake. I don't know if you saw this. So there's a press conference evening of November 9th, 1989.
But yeah.
And
The guy kind of says it. And
yeah,
he wasn't
exactly.
really
So
supposed to.
yeah,
I didn't even know if he could. He's like, yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So yeah, sorry,
I,
no.
I,
So this East German Politburo member basically prematurely announces that restriction on travel visas will be lifted. Like they've determined that East Berlin, West Berlin, no more restrictions on travel visas. And when he was asked when the new policy would begin, he said immediately without delay. But actually, the policy, to be announced was the following day, would still have required East Germans to go through this visa application process. He basically like messed up the date. Like this was like, oh yes, there's going to be lifted soon, as opposed to immediately. And basically, as soon as he says this,
people start flocking to the
yeah,
wall.
people
That's
start
it.
flocking to the wall. So it's nighttime, right? It's an evening, and you have all of a sudden thousands of people flock to the wall, to the Berlin Wall, East Berliners. And here at this checkpoint, the Bornholmer Street checkpoint, is this one particular chief of officer on duty. His name is Jaeger. And he's facing a mob that is growing to thousands, like thousands upon thousands. They're frustrated, and he's being screamed at. And so he starts calling his people, and he's just like, "Wait, what's like? Can I let people through this checkpoint? Like, is it okay?" And his instructors are apparently screaming at him and cursing him out. No, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he basically, this is the true story of Jaeger was actually awaiting his cancer results the next day, and he said he was just done. He's like, forget it. So he opens the border crossing on his own without any,
And once they start going through, that's it.
boom, that was it.
That's it. It's done. And
Gates
that's what
open.
happens. They're going through. I remember if you, again, I'm getting back to what I was saying before, you watch news broadcasts, they're actually there earlier that day before that night. And there's people trying to run across the wall and they actually get stopped by the guards and they're returned back, but they're not shot. And they're like, even this is like a big deal. The fact that they didn't shoot this guy, because they're asking the guards, what do you think is going to happen? He's like, that's not for us to decide. That's for the politicians to decide. And then they decided it. And so then people start going. And a lot of the people leaving said, listen, we're going to go back to our homes in East Berlin. We just want to see what's going on in the West. We want to see, just being able to go back and forth changes everything for us. Obviously, a lot of people, once they start experiencing what's going on there, right, it's going to
Crazy.
it's going to change things. But a lot of times it was you said people started chipping at the wall later on with like axes and hammers and stuff like that. They bring in bulldozers and stuff like that, and then the wall starts to slowly. They start to actually tear it down.
Yeah. No.
And then the reunification of East and West is made official on October 3rd, 1990, almost a year after the wall itself actually comes down. Like I said, I do remember this. I know I'm not, it wasn't as big of a deal for me. I'm not going to lie. Back in 1989 as it was for you.
Well, you were 7. You were playing Nintendo. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was enjoying Optimus Prime, but I remember seeing it on TV. I remember hearing about it. I remember like my parents talking about it, my aunts and uncles kind of talking about it. So it's one of those events. You're a kid, you see it, you knew it happened, but you don't really understand it until I got obviously much older.
Yeah. And then we started with David Hasselhoff, but let's kind of get back to this for a second, because a month later, so December 31st, 1989, David Hasselhoff became the headlining performer for the Freedom Tour live concert, which was, this became like a pop sensation of when the wall's coming down. And basically it was attended by over 500,000 people on both sides of the wall. And this is a live concert that is directed by a music video director. Again, you can see all this on YouTube. And it's broadcast on basically all over the world, throughout Europe and in the United States. And during the film, the shooting, the personnel pulled up people from both sides, West and East, stand on the wall, celebrate at the top of the wall. And Hasselhoff's like running around with this like glowing jacket, singing his song, like looking for freedom. All while next to him, you can see in the background, there's a steel crane that's literally swinging above and like destroying the actual wall. And this is, and you said something before that was interesting, like the people chipping on the wall and all that stuff. I mean,
often use your bare hands too.
Yeah, and the idea was like, this is something, and I'm pretty sure I have a piece of Berlin Wall somewhere that my dad actually chipped off himself years ago. But so official demolition of the wall began in the summer of 1990, like the official one, right? More than 40,000 wall sections were recycled into building materials that were used for German reconstruction projects. But a few hundred segments were auctioned off and are basically scattered around the globe. There's some in the Vatican Gardens, which I thought was interesting. But I think the one that really got me was that there's a section of the Berlin Wall in a men's room of the Main Street Station Casino in Las Vegas, and they attach urinals to the wall on the graffiti-covered wall segment. I think that's insane.
Yeah.
It's
it's crazy. I mean, we didn't mention, I guess we forgot to mention in 87, Reagan gives a speech.
And also Bruce Springsteen, 88.
Well, he was in 88. Yeah, so this was before. So Reagan gives his speech at the anniversary of Berlin itself, where he says, Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Like that was kind of like his big thing there. Springsteen actually gives a
concert.
Like a concert, and he's huge in the 80s, right? Bruce Springsteen used to be band, a concert for over 300,000 in East Berlin.
That's the key right there. He's in East Berlin.
He's in East Berlin, giving the fact that he allowed this, and he gave it in English. This is a guy who is, one of his songs is Born in the USA. Yeah. And he says here, look, I'm not here for government or against any government. I'm here to play rock and roll for East Berliners and hope that one day the barriers will be torn down. And later on it does. So I guess Hasselhoff can say what he wants. I'm going to give credit to it to the boss from someone else from Jersey.
I was going to say, you're just being biased. You don't like David Hasselhoff.
I have no problem with David Hasselhoff. I like Knight Rider and...
But like David Hasselhoff was huge. He was huge.
He's huge in Germany. He's huge. They always make that. They always talk about that, and they make fun of that in like movies and how big David Hasselhoff, the Dodgeball movie. What's other movies like that? You name it. He has a lot of records there too, like German records and stuff like that. He's a very famous, I guess, pop singer icon there. So seeing him there was a big deal for individuals, without a doubt. Like we mock it kind of, David Hasselhoff, whatever, but it was a big deal. He definitely had a role to play. I don't know if they like tore down the wall just so they could hear more of his music,
Crazy.
but
I remember
it's
when I was
definitely
growing
that.
up in Poland, there used to be a German magazine, which is actually still around today. It's called Bravo. And it was all about like music and actors and stuff like that. And I remember specifically him on the Bravo cover. Like he was the celebrity, even for me growing up. I mean, I saw the first time I saw Kit and Knight Rider, it was in German. I mean, I thought it was a German TV show. I had no idea it was American. Struggle's real, man.
The struggle is real. I don't know if it's a struggle. Actually, going to describe your childhood as a struggle.
I remember at one point when we visited Germany when I was younger, on West German side, they had these platforms that were set up for um, just visitors, I guess, and tourists, and we got to walk up this platform to peek across to the eastern side. You paid like
Like city.
whatever. Yeah, you paid like a little 1 mark or something, and you like went to see what East Germany looks like. Mind you, we drove through East Germany. I mean, I 100%. Again, it was really interesting driving through East Germany when
It's
you
like a
see
different. I
like
mean,
Soviet
different
cars
world.
and
Yeah,
Fiats
yeah.
and whatnot, and then you get to West Germany, and you're like, whoa! Same thing. Like the first time I saw a Ford, I was under the impression that a car Ford was a German vehicle because you only saw those in West Berlin. As a kid, this wasn't something that you would see in East Germany at all. Which, again, the misconception, but that's the whole point, which is why people are trying to escape because all of the Western amenities, I guess, all the Western things, cultural as well as economic, came through West Berlin. You got anything else? I mean, I think this.
Well, I mean, talk about. I guess this is a little off. Well, part of the topic, and we'll get to some fun facts. But like, there was a lot of talk about the reunification, right? And they talked about even years after. There's a lot of cultural differences between the East and West Germans. Just how they were. Found that there was like a poll in 2004 that found that 25% of West Germans and 25% of East Germans wish that the East and West should be separate again by the wall. Actually, that's like a 2004 poll. As years go on, that kind of changes, but there was a lot of like just cultural differences as far as like what their values were, how they saw life and stuff like that. Even though even though people from the East really liked what they saw in the West, or like in awe, for a lot of people too, it was kind of too much.
Yeah.
Like it was like this is. Think about it. If you didn't experience like capitalist culture, and then suddenly it's like, oh, you want a hamburger? Or what do you want it from? You want one from Wendy's, Burger King, McDonald's, all these different places. You're like, what's going on? You know what I mean? Like that's just like a crazy, crazy
Crazy.
culture shock. Yeah. So it's not one that's just easily going to just go away. That's just going to, like, you're not just going to assimilate both of these people into like the same way. And all the West Germans saw East Germans as like almost like backwards for a while. Like, what are you talking about? Like, like you want to live
And
like
I
this when
think
you,
to,
when you
I
could
think
live
to
like that?
a certain extent they were. I mean, they were behind. Like, I mean, trust me. Growing up in the Eastern Bloc, I was like at least 30 years behind the West. Like like when the first time I saw Star Wars and the first time I saw Jaws was in black and white. I had no idea those movies were in color.
Yeah. No, I mean, definitely there
And
wasn't
this is
just
the
like.
'80s, Tom. Like, make that
No,
comparison
I
of.
get what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. It was a
So they were
different.
different. It was different for
It
East
was very
Germans and
different.
West
Yeah, so it
Germans.
wasn't that easy. And like nowadays, there's just like a kind of like a line indicating where the inner part of the wall once stood.
Yeah,
It's like they have some of those and stuff like that. I know you said you had a piece of the wall. That's kind of like to a fun fact. Apparently, you can buy pieces on eBay. I know my history teacher in high school had like a piece on his desk, had like a little plaque on it. But then, like experts have said that if you take all the pieces that are being sold on eBay and around the world, and you put them all together, it would be like bigger than the wall actually was. That's how much like fake memorabilia there is. I know there's actually a very large piece at the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum on Atlantic City Boardwalk.
I
They have
saw
like a
that. I
large.
actually have a
They have
picture
a
in front of that one as well.
yeah. They have like a very large section of it there.
Hmm.
Obviously, museums all around the world, but
Yeah.
because it's iconic. You think about communism, you think about the fall of communism in Eastern Europe too. It is a major thing because as the Berlin Wall falls, so does basically Soviet Union. Eventually, like about a year later, they disband.
By the way, so Checkpoint Charlie, it's definitely the most famous out of all of them. Um, and today, when you go there, by the way, I was there maybe like 7, 8 years ago, standing by Checkpoint Charlie, and you could take a picture with actors dressed as basically like the guards, the Soviet and the American
That's
guys.
weird. Yeah, that's. I mean, I guess it's not any different in New York City. You go around and
Yeah,
take
it
pictures of
literally
it.
it seems very much Checkpoint
It's like,
Charlie. It's like I feel like I was like on Broadway,
like
but
people died there. Like, and now you're like
literally,
you taking
literally.
pictures.
But the reason also why it became so popular because there was a huge standoff there. I don't know if you remember this.
In the 1961.
Yeah, 61, right? There's a tank standoff between Soviets and
Yeah.
US forces, and it starts with this US diplomat, Leitner, I think. He's trying to travel to East Germany. He's stopped at the border and he refuses to show his papers to the East German border guard. And he says that as a US citizen based on US policy, he only had to show them to Soviets, not to East Germans. And basically this argument's escalated to the point that the Allies, the U.S. sends 10 tanks to Checkpoint Charlie. They're sent there by President Kennedy. And then the Soviets send their own 10 tanks. So now you have these tanks that are literally
Stand
at
up
this
there. Oh,
one.
it's over like an opera, right? I think it's over
Yeah.
like he was going to go on an opera.
It was like, 16 hours. You had these like, ready loaded tanks that were just about to start shooting one another. And they wound up not. But
Yeah, if one side shoots, it's World War III. That's how it starts.
yeah,
Like, there's a lot of times that almost happened. Yeah, that was October of '61. They said it was like basically the nuclear age equivalent of the OK Corral
with tanks. With
with
tanks.
tanks and massive, consequences
Yeah.
if things don't go over very well.
I mean, it's kind of hard to say what other fun facts there are about the
It's
Berlin
not really
Wall.
fun facts. Yeah, I wouldn't say interesting facts. Like we said, that there's a
I
bunch,
feel like
but I think we also
I think we
covered
touched on
most of
yeah.
them just talking
Yeah.
about it. This is one of those things that whenever I went over it in class, and I kind of wish I still taught it, but like kids are fascinated by, like they really are, because they're like, wait, whenever we get to like the whole like that whole thing, they're like fascinated by like how it wasn't that long ago. Like I guess it was, but also wasn't.
Yeah.
Like so,
Well, each year it gets longer and longer as we teach.
Yes, but but it was recorded. Like this is an event
Yeah.
in history that was totally recorded. It's not newsreel, right? It's not just
Yeah.
pictures. It's not paintings. It's you can see, you can actually watch it as it happened. Like they were broadcasting on ABC News, and every news channel was talking about it. They have these papers, you have interviews. A lot of the people who were there might have been teenagers at the time or young kids like we were. They lived through it in some way. They're alive now. They're talking about it. So that history of it is still very much alive, and you have these firsthand accounts that you don't have a lot of other things you talk about. We're talking about the Revolutionary War. You don't have that. You talk about even World War II. You have less and less, right?
Yeah.
But and this is one of those events that you do have that primary source, that firsthand experience. And it's just interesting to get it from. Like you were there, you have the firsthand experience. You're going to be telling your kids, you're going to be telling your grandkids. My kids learn about it. I'm going to say,
hopefully they listen.
Talk about what I remember from it. Just one of those events. And I think they do listen. I think it's something that they find interesting because it's in, like you said before, it's in color. They can see it, they can hear it. It's a lot more real. You can actually get a piece of it, and show it to them.
Yeah.
If you really wanted to, you can take them to a museum and you can see a piece of it, and that's making history real, which I think like really helps.
Yeah. Actually, today I was watching. Right before we started recording, I got my 13-year-old to start watching Band of Brothers with me, and so far we're on the first episode. But he's like, "This is pretty cool, Dad." I'm like, "Yep, based on real events." Love Band of Brothers. But one last thing I kind of want to come back to real quick as a fun, and this might be our last fun or interesting thing here, because we did touch upon this death strip between the eastern side of the wall. But if you really look into it, and there's a YouTube video that actually explains the whole thing that I showed to my students, this really was aptly named a death strip, and because it was pretty scary. On the eastern German side, right? If you try to escape, you had this like 150, 60-meter stretch called a death strip, obviously. And it was basically put in place to stop any potential crossings. But it had floodlights, anti-tank barricades, a signal fence that activated an alarm the second you touched it, beds of nails throughout the field that were actually like buried in sand, so you didn't even see the nails. This was known as Stalin's lawn. That's what they used to call it. Buried mines, electrified fencing, and then a row of freshly raked sand was added so you would see any footprints whatsoever. And then you have armed guards and towers that had orders to shoot any defector on site. So literally, this was a death strip. Like you could not get out across the Berlin Wall. So that's my last interesting fact, I guess. But anyway, I think that pretty much covers the Berlin Wall, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's part of pop culture. There's statues, there's video games based on the Berlin Wall or have parts of it, like Call of Duty Black Ops has it. There's SimCity has ones. There's all these different games. Where it's an iconic thing. It's part of 21st century. History.
Nuts.
The world we know today doesn't exist without the Berlin Wall coming down.
Yep.
That says it's a different place.
If
it's still up today, the world is very different than what it is right now.
That is true. All right. So to everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in once more to our podcast. We really do appreciate your continued support. And if you need to find us, you can find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. And please, whenever you listen to this, please, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Why not? We do enjoy those. So having said that, I will see everybody next week, and have a great week, guys.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ziprecruiter.com/zip. That's ziprecruiter.com/zip. ziprecruiter.com/zip.